Welcome to the Living Legends. I am Fayyaz Qureshi. In this edition of the Living Legends, we speak to a man whose contribution to Kenya's online scene may have been forgotten. 30 years ago, he became the father of internet to Kenya. He went on to consult in the same field for the republics of Rwanda and South Sudan. To most people, he's known as the former MP for Rangwe constituency. On the Living Legends tonight, we speak to Honorable Dr. Shem Ochuodho. Dr. Shem,
thank you.
It's an extreme pleasure to have an absolute legend like you on the Living Legends as our guest.
Thank you.
Asante sana.
Thank you, Quresh. Thank you, KBC. I'm greatly honored. I didn't think I merit to be considered a legend, but thank you so much.
In our eyes, you do. And this is a tribute to you.
I appreciate
now,
it.
Let's start off with your early life and education.
Right. I went to a primary school in Homa Bay called Nyawita Primary School. I had the privilege of jumping from standard 1 to standard 3 for two reasons. One, in our time, those from primary 3 upwards would go back to school in the afternoon. Standards 1 and 2 would go, and then at lunchtime they go home.
Right.
I think I was so much in love with school that I would request the teachers, can I come back? So for some reason, the teachers allowed me to go to standard 3 after standard 1.
Extremely dedicated at a very early point in your life, huh?
That's right, yeah. And I should say I also went further for standard 7. I scored 3 straight A's.
Wow.
Which was the first time that school, Nyawita, was getting somebody with 36 points at our time. And I think it took about 10, 12 or so years after me. There was somebody else who I think got 36 points. So yeah, I enjoyed being in that school and I keep in touch with the school. And then thereafter I went to secondary school. Something interesting here happened. With 36 points I would go to any school in Kenya that I wanted. But a rural headmaster then, as they were called, now I think principals, didn't think anybody would get marks to go to Alliance. So Alliance wasn't among my choices. My number 1 choice, because you had to take a national school, was Mawego Technical School. Was my first choice. The second and third were local schools, Migori, I think, and Sawagongo, if I can remember, in Nyanza. Actually, Mawego, I think, was number 4. Because you had to take 1 national school. Obviously, when it came to intake, the national schools were taking people first. And that tells me also something, that we haven't handled technical education very well in this country. I was happy that I've been through and through technical. Because after Mawego, I went to Mombasa Polytechnic for my advanced levels studies, what was then called A-levels.
Right.
I know most people know Kenya Polytechnic, Mombasa Polytechnic, but for diplomas and higher national diplomas. In our time, they used to offer, at least Mombasa Polytechnic was offering A-levels.
Okay, interesting.
Then after Mombasa Polytechnic, I was admitted at the University of Nairobi to do architecture. I didn't quite like, I missed engineering with 1 point. And I wanted to do electrical engineering. So I was told if you go instead to do science, physics, and you do well in first year, second year, you can shift over to the Faculty of Engineering. And I worked so hard, I think I left another record there. I think we had about 12 subjects. In first year, I had 10 A's and then 2 B's. So I should have naturally, in the second year, changed over to electrical engineering.
Right.
But by that time, I'd become so much in love with physics, I even forgot. I just remembered about 2 months later that my plan was to shift, but it was already too late now to shift. Those days, people could change faculties on certain conditions.
Right.
So I did, of course, we had a stint in 1982. We happened to have been state guests. I was a student leader. I was incarcerated for 10 months. And immediately we were released. We were put to do exams. I got an upper second, and I got admitted to do masters, and I got scholarships too at the same time to do masters in physics and also to do masters in electrical engineering. So my time to now transit to electrical and electronics engineering had come. So I did my masters at the University of Nairobi. And then I immediately was absorbed also as a tutorial fellow. I think first as a graduate assistant at the university. As a tutorial fellow, then I got a scholarship, British Council. Then it was Overseas Development Assistance, ODA, to study in the UK. I went to the University of York where I did my PhD in software engineering. But something I should say, while at the University of Nairobi, I think we were the second lot with Professor Gerald Chege. We were the second to graduate in masters. Before us, only one person had graduated with a master's from electrical engineering, University of Nairobi, and I think it took her 8 years. We did it in 2.5 years, which was also a record.
Wow.
So we both went to the UK with Gerald. We went slightly to different routes. So I went into software engineering, particularly for telecom systems, and I did some assignments with British Telecom, Telecom Australia, Marconi Telecom, Italy, and so on.
So it was a great progression.
Absolutely.
From engineering to software.
That's right. That's right. And in the process, I should say I was very likely the first Kenyan software engineer. And
the first Kenyan software engineer.
Correct.
That's historic.
Well, my great pleasure.
That's why we have you here.
Thank you so much, Qureshi. And then I went for postdoctoral fellowship in the US, University of California, Berkeley. I think the rest is history. I was happy to come back home in around 1992.
That was a lot of work. Was there any time to play?
No, well, a little bit. I used to play tennis. Actually, while at the University of Nairobi, at one point I was captain of lawn tennis. So there was a bit of that, but a lot of time was spent reading.
Reading. Well done, well done.
Thank you.
Now, you're among, the father of internet.
Right.
Okay?
Sure.
It was actually tested at your house.
Yes, internet came through one of my
Not many people know that.
Yeah, I know a little.
Facts are being distorted.
A little bit of distortion happened. I think the past 17 or so years have largely been outside the country. In fact, apart from Rwanda and South Sudan,
Right.
I've had opportunity to do things in about nearly 40 other African countries for short term, 2 weeks, up to a maximum of about 13 years that I've done in South Sudan. So,
yeah. So that was 30 years ago when the internet was first tested, and that was at your residence.
To be precise,
with a few technicians around you.
That's right. We had a few engineers I was working with. It was actually 26 years to be exact.
Okay.
Because it happened on the night of 24th October 1995. So it will soon be, we celebrated 25 years of internet actually in Africa.
So tell us more about this. How exciting was this whole thing?
It was extremely exciting because while in the UK and the US and Australia, because after US, I did some further research work with what was then called Telestra or Telcom Australia. But I decided to come back home, and against all manner of advice. Why do you go back home? You know, you basically become a citizen of the world.
What was the reason?
I love my
patriotism? Nationalism?
Patriotism.
Giving back, because we're actually getting a brain drain now.
Actually, we have a brain circulation because I'm heavily involved in matters of diaspora at the moment.
Right.
But at that time, it was patriotism, but also I felt that we needed to uplift our people. So coming back home, I realized there was no internet, and then I said, okay, how on earth in today's world can somebody do meaningful research without internet?
Without the internet.
So I started walking the journey. It wasn't easy, but we were happy. Through the support of US National Science Foundation, NSF, and again the ODA, UK Overseas Development Agency, they were able to support us, and we got internet. Working with our engineers, we had to spend nearly 28 hours just trying to connect wires to talk to Oregon in the US to get Kenya connected. Right. But it was even more interesting before that, Qureshi, because we used to have what was called dial-up. Right. And when we started, and then I was like the main server that was carrying all Kenyan information, and people would dial through the server in my house and collect their mails. Soon after, UNEP also started offering a service like that. But when we started, we used to dial once a week. Every Wednesday midnight, we would pick all mails destined for Kenya. And then people would dial our server whenever they want. It was like a mailbox, a post office. Wow. They pick and drop. Store and forward was the system. And then from once a week, we moved on to 3 times a week, and then once a day, and then 4 times a day, and then every hour, until eventually we got into what now we call TCP, which is real-time internet. So that's the journey we walked. When we used to poll, we used to call through London, an organization called Greenet. And of course, often I used to travel a lot. So my wife herself became a specialist because now somebody had to keep operating the server. Okay. In fact, one joke is my youngest daughter, who was a toddler, then would come and grab me from the computer room saying, "Dad, if you don't have anything interesting to do, come we play," you know. For her, that was more exciting to play than to do fidget with the wires. I should say I'm very happy. Today my daughter has gotten a second admission to do second law masters at a second Ivy League university. She already had admission to UniPenn, University of Penn State, and now she has admission to Columbia to join her husband, who is an alumnus of Harvard. So I'm very happy today. But that was, thank you. That was the young girl who was saying that.
Like father, like daughter, eh?
Well, looks like.
Heading in your footsteps.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I was glad I also went to an Ivy League.
Such a blessing.
Because University of California, Berkeley is an Ivy League. But all this we thank God. It wouldn't have been possible. Right. And we give glory to Him.
Sorry. Okay, now, in terms of the evolution of the internet in Kenya over the last 30 years, right? Focusing on the major game changes and how the regulatory framework has changed.
A bit of it has changed, but if you permit, Qureshi, allow me to say, apart from the young girl, even my bosses at the university, because that time I was teaching at Chiromo, then it was called Institute of Computer Science. Right. My boss, the director then, because I would fidget with wires late into the night, I remember once he came and found me in the labs around 9 p.m. The next day, he told the subject masters, add Shem some more hours to teach because he's idle. The fact that he was finding me in the lab late at night, to him was idle. He is a very senior professor, So it wasn't only the young one who didn't see the value. Yeah. But even Kenyans, when we started talking about the internet, I belong to the Adventist faith. One of my elders was telling us how the wife used to tell him that, look, I don't want these things of Shem, of internet, is satanic. But 25, nearly 30 years later, when she was doing her master's recently, she was to rely wholly on the internet. So they were laughing with their husband that we used to think this thing was satanic.
It's the greatest thing that's ever happened to us.
Yeah. So there has been a journey walked. Yeah. Part of my going to politics actually was not because that was my calling. It was because I felt I needed to push the technology agenda in the country. In fact, even before the internet, as chair of Computer Society of Kenya, then it was called Kenya Computer Institute, I had this onerous task to convince also not only people in government, but even the corporates that computers were good for the country. The older members of a society may recall a past president, late President Moi, God rest his soul in peace, said in a rally in Nakuru that Kenya does not need computers, they're going to take away jobs. So part of our work as professionals was to convince government that after all computers weren't so bad. Even banks, initially computerizing was a nightmare. But I'm glad we went in that manner. The same could have been said of also the internet. Even though I was voted Father of Internet in the year 2000, when I was accepting the award, I did attribute it to 3 very special Kenyans. I don't think internet would have happened then had it not been for them. Mika Cheserem was then governor of the Central Bank.
Central Bank, yes.
Dr. Ambassador Benjamin Kipkulei was Kenya's ambassador in the US at the time.
Right.
And Brigadier Wilson Boynet then was the head of what today is like NIS. Okay?
So they were quite instrumental.
They were extremely instrumental, because at one point the governor did visit the ambassador in the US. In that time, and before he came back home, and before internet happened, if you were outside the country, for me being in the UK, we would only get newspapers like on Jamhuri Day, when we would travel from York to London to the High Commission for Jamhuri Day celebrations, and then you find a 2 or 3 month old newspaper. Or unless you called home, but it was very expensive to call. So how we got internet to start around 92 conversations, because we also rallied Kenyans together. Before then, it wasn't possible. Maybe this is when people talk of 5 of us. There were 6 of us who were outside, who created what became KenyaNet, but that was more for the diasporas outside. There were 3 members, Isi Makatiani, Ouma Gor, and Gakio Karanja at MIT in the US. There was and still is Dr. Matunda Nyanchama in Canada. And there was and still is Dr. Otieno Mbari in Finland, and I was in the UK. We were all IT specialists.
Okay.
Let's call ourselves informaticians, because my students often ask me, what do we call ourselves? They're engineers, doctors, accountants. We're informaticians. So the 6 of us were informaticians. So we started exchanging information on the internet. When somebody calls home, you share. That gave birth, fast forward, to what became KenyaNet, later Kenya Community Abroad, and now Kenya Diaspora Alliance. So, well, that was the journey how we got internet in.
So now let's tell us a little bit more about, obviously, 30 years down the line now,
right.
The regulatory framework.
Yes.
Has it changed?
Okay. Yes, I was mentioning...
And what are the major game changers right now?
Absolutely. Part of why I went to Parliament was to push the technology agenda. I remember once we had a workshop with members of Parliament then. 32 attended, and strangely 31 were from the opposition then. Right. Only one from government was the minister then, later Dr. Zachary Onyonka was Minister for Science and Technology, right. Attended. He opened the workshop. One of the MPs, or let me say 2, inspired me to get into politics, the late Dr. Ukio Mbaka and Honorable Alo Geka. Dr. Mbaka said, Shem, these things you are telling us sound very interesting, but they don't mean much to us. Maybe if you were one of us, policymakers would listen to you. So that's when I started having ideas of getting to Parliament. Unfortunately, in 96, 97, I was elected to be Rangwe MP. My greatest contribution while in Parliament was the 2008 communications law. This is the law that liberalized the telecom sector. Let me say that 2 years before, in 1996 and 1997, the draft bill before Parliament was shot down. Then the late Ntimama William was Minister for Communications. Before him, I think Mheshimiwa, former Deputy, now Right Honorable Prime Secretary, right. Musalia Mudavadi was in Communications. But twice Parliament refused the communications law because the MPs were saying we don't want to sell away our sovereignty. So when I got to Parliament, I was able to first rally a group of 6 MPs that eventually also gave birth to Muungano wa Mageuzi. In English, that's a National Rainbow Coalition. Right. But these 6 convinced another 22 MPs who were calling ourselves progressives, who said, no, this is good for the country. And they moved the other members of Parliament to pass the communications law.
Which I think was a milestone.
Absolutely it was, because It's what has liberalized it.
That was the turning point.
Yeah, before that, actually, immediately after my undergraduate, which was also some interesting thing, Qureshi. At our time, you leave the university, there are 3 jobs waiting. Have a job from Kenya Post and Telecoms, have a job from Rank Xerox, have a job from Price Waterhouse as an audit trainee. That's not the case now for our children and grandchildren. We hope we can get back to that. But having said that, this is what allowed Kenya Post and Telecom then to be split, and a regulator, communications authority, to be formed, mobile communications to be allowed, because now we're talking of liberalization, Safaricom and others came in. So it was a major milestone.
Yeah, and it's helping the generation of today.
Absolutely.
Now, you've consulted for the Republic of South Sudan on matters technology.
Yes.
What are your experiences working for the world's youngest nation?
Pretty interesting. You will allow me to talk a little more about Rwanda, okay. Partly because of I still have connections. When you're a civil servant, you are a bit constrained in what you can say. But as a former senior advisor...
Shall we do South Sudan, and then we'll talk extensively about Rwanda?
For South Sudan, my greatest contribution, and I should say, despite being the world's youngest country, it's only South Sudan, apart from the United States, which has got a telephone code that has got a meaning. Why am I saying this? The USA and Canada is +1, because it's America.
Right.
South Sudan, you know, Kenya, we have +2454.
Yeah.
What does it mean? Uganda, 256. What does it mean? 255 for Tanzania. What does it mean? South Sudan is 211. The year of independence, 2011.
Wow, okay. Very significant.
Absolutely. That probably remains and may remain my biggest contribution. It has happened that when South Sudan got independence, it was the first time that an African was leading the International Telecom Union. That's the body that allocates country codes. And the president sent us with the Minister of Telecom to actually Guadalajara in Mexico. There was a plenipotentiary meeting every 4 years. Yeah. And we made a request that the cabinet of South Sudan has requested to be given this number +211. Strictly speaking, the numbers were sequential. The latest was Eritrea, which was 291, +291. So the number that South Sudan was to get was 292. It had to take almost like an executive decision of of the then Secretary General Hamadoun Touré, Dr. Hamadoun Touré of Mali, who was then the head of the International Telecom Union. So that's been it. The other major achievement was South Sudan's .ss. That's also something we pushed hard for, having secured .ke, which was the Kenyan domain, which administered for about 10 years before handing over. The South Sudan, there was quite a bit of resistance. There is, I think an underground movement, .ss, and that's being awarded by International Standards Organization. So again, we used quite a bit of the connection we have globally in the telecom and the standard sector to secure that. But having said that, a lot of work remains done. One graphical experience I remember accompanying my minister with a telecom company, then MTN, to launch in a rural South Sudan area. And an old mama being called upon to move a vote of thanks to my minister. She was so moved. She was saying, "Minister, you made me talk to my son who has been in America for 24 years, and I could hear him. The only thing I could not do, I could not shake his hand." You know, it was so graphic. So yes, there are those experiences. Kenyans have made some contributions, and we hope more will continue to be
remarkable contributions which are being appreciated, definitely.
But allow me to talk about Rwanda, because...
So that's where I'm coming now.
Okay.
You were the ICT advisor to Rwanda's Minister of State in charge of Energy and Communications.
Right.
And CEO of the Rwanda Information Technology Authority. Correct. RITA, Rita. Correct. Tell us more about this.
I greatly enjoyed it. I've had the privilege to work for 4 different heads of states, different countries. including Rwanda. And I really enjoyed working for President Kagame because he's very tech-savvy. And he's a go-getter. 3 things I learned from him. One is humility. He would tell us, I meet wazungus or donors, I call them sir. At the end of the day, I get what I need for the Rwandese people. I'm still the president. The second lesson I picked from him was looking at the big picture. Don't worry too much about little things. And don't worry about things you have little control over. The third final lesson I got from him was sense of urgency. He would say Rwanda has so much been left behind the world that we have to move 3 times, at least twice, as fast to catch up with the rest of the world. And when the new administration was elected in Kenya, I thought President Dr. Ruto, who I was privileged to serve with in the 8th Parliament as well, was reading from same script. I saw a retreat being held outside. President Kagame used to do that. Once at the beginning of the year, they would go out with the top government officials. I was probably the only foreigner who joined, given my level, the level of office I was holding.
I think President Kagame has been such a role model
Absolutely.
for the whole of Africa, hasn't he?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And you having met him personally must be an amazing experience.
Absolutely. And we used to brief him very often, at least once every quarter.
Yeah.
And he wanted results, and he would take decisions on the spot as long as you had a good thing to do for Rwanda.
So moving on, you think our government is heading in the same direction?
I thought it was. It still remains to be seen. When I saw the retreat take place, and I saw the president reprimand his cabinet secretaries with President Kagame, and in Rwanda, ministers come 5 minutes before meetings, and that's known. So I saw a bit of that. I'm hoping that we continue reading from that script and give some results so that we lift Kenyans out of poverty. Of course, Rwanda is the only country on earth where there are more women MPs than men.
Oh.
Yeah, so gender is a major issue. There are many firsts. We are lucky to get computers into schools. When Kenya was trying to get laptops to schools, I thought it was being done the wrong way, but we didn't have opportunity to give input. We could just look next door and learn from the experience. Maybe lastly, just to say, when I was going to Rwanda, I had a simultaneous offer to go to a Southern African country with probably 2.5 times better terms. But I thought by going to Rwanda, apart from being able to contribute to the vision that would be able to push Kenya next door. And we saw that happen when Kenya started moving when Rwanda was moving in tech. So in a way, what we thought we tried to do in Kenya and wasn't happening, but we're able to do. But I must also mention...
But you know, it's amazing that after the turmoil that Rwanda went through,
correct,
and the progress that they've achieved over a short period of time, with, of course, with President Kagame being at the helm. State.
Sure. Yeah, it's incredible because Rwanda, I think, for about 8 or so years has witnessed 6-7% annual growth, which is quite remarkable. But yeah, I'm hoping that they can get to do much more. The one thing is that Rwanda was also the first country in this region to start a technopark. Again, it was a decision, an executive decision of the cabinet that the president sent us first to Stockholm with my minister. Another interesting experience while in Stockholm, because my minister was also in charge of communications and transport. So government vehicles were under his purview. While we are in Stockholm, the driver calls him that, sir, the car has been repossessed. He said, not a problem. We had agreed in the cabinet that the cars are being possessed. You know, rules work and a rule of law works. And once a decision has been made, there is no exception. So many good things we can learn from Rwanda, good manners, very little corruption, I should say.
Yes.
And of course, that's not to say Rwanda does not
we can head in the same direction.
I hope so. That's not to say it doesn't have its own challenges.
Now tell me, you were MP for Rangwe and later founded the National Alliance that, of course, led to the formation of NARC that won the 2002 elections.
Right.
Tell us about your time in the political scene.
Yeah,
during that point in time?
I enjoyed serving the people, the great people of Rangwe. Then it was the greater Rangwe was Rangwe and what's today Homa Bay town constituency. So I was privileged to serve them for one term. I would have loved to serve longer, but that was not to be, and I had no regrets because I'd at least achieved the technology agenda to the extent possible. But while in Parliament, apart from the Communications Act, I think one of my other major achievements, a number would credit us with being architects for the National Rainbow Coalition. I was convener stroke secretary.
Right.
6 of us MPs, former MPs, Engineer Alfred Nderitu, John Katuku, the late Enoch Nyankea Magara, and yes, Honorable Moses Muia. We were able to rally opposition leaders together. Then the late President Kibaki, the late former Minister Simon Nyachai, the Kijana Wamalwa, Charity Ngilu, and others, and then eventually got KANU out of power. When we started, we were being told you guys are daydreamers because KANU opposition will never unite. But we left, we were inspired with what happened during independence struggle. We do know that the freedom fighters, our forefathers and foremothers, were told there's no way an African with a rungu will ever get out the colonialists. But they were determined, and it all came to pass. So in the same manner, we were convinced that as long as certain parameters are right, the key issue was to unite the opposition, and we are glad that happened. Of course, the NAC government, the Thika Superhighway, the Vision 2030, and a whole lot of things that some of us who had the opportunity to work for President Kibaki could see. If only we had, I think we witnessed a 7% growth.
Possibly the best era.
Yes.
And like you said,
right.
Anything can be done. If you have the will and the determination, go for it.
Absolutely.
And you guys did a fantastic job.
Thank you.
And let's hope it continues.
Much my pleasure. And talking of technology, if you permit, a little contribution I've also made. There was a time that I thought it was about a third of what we'd call internet fundis in town were my students. I remember current president of Computer Society of Kenya telling me about half. Nearly all the top names you may mention in IT either were my students or products of my products. And I feel proud to have made that little contribution to the country and to the region.
I think your contributions have been immense in terms of the father of the internet, the communications bill,
sure.
Your expertise in terms of ICT.
And
you're totally across the board, and you're an absolute legend.
Thank you so much. And one interesting thing is that it turns out that for sub-Saharan Africa, Kenya was the first country to have internet. So this is why sometimes we say when we can claim we've brought internet.
That's a great honor, and it's partly to you and the 4 or 5 others that you mentioned, right?
Actually, this is now a different lot. The fourth we worked with was when I was outside to rally the diasporas. And the diaspora has now become a gold mine. When it came to bringing the internet was a different ballgame. However, we have about 8, we call them internauts, internet pioneers, like, the astronauts.
Right.
1 Kenyan, 1 Nigerian, 1 Egyptian, 1 Tunisian, 1 Mozambican, and so on. So this was now a different lot. People who pioneered getting internet into their own countries.
Dr. Shem Ochuodho.
Thank you.
We could talk for hours and hours. There's so much to chat with you.
Thank you.
It's been great speaking to you on the Living Legends, and extreme honor. If
you permit, just a word on the diaspora, because it's the next big thing. They are the sheriffs in town. The Africa's diaspora remit into the continent a whooping $100 billion. Most of that goes 30 billion to Egypt, 25B to Nigeria, 9B to Morocco. Between 3 to 5B per year to Kenya, Ghana, and Ethiopia each. For Kenya, last year it was $4.2 billion, which is more than what we get from the 3 top leading agricultural exports. Tea, horticulture, and coffee put together in a good year bring 2.4 billion. In a good year, tourism brings 1.2 billion. Diaspora brings nearly 4 times. That's why I'm calling them the new sheriff in town. They're helping stabilize the Kenya shillings.
Yeah,
and
they've become the first #1
absolutely, no doubt,
for this country.
No doubt. And that's only about 5% of what they can bring. We are hoping that when government lays a red carpet to them, we can unlock the remaining 95%. As a matter of fact, in Kenya shillings, the diasporas are already bringing $500 billion. Our goal by 2030 is to see diasporas bring $1 trillion Kenya shillings into the country.
So what you're saying, this is just the tip of the iceberg.
Absolutely.
There's much more that can be done.
Absolutely. And when we are talking of $1 trillion shillings, the diaspora goes beyond just the Kenyan diaspora, African diaspora. They are the historical diasporas, Caribbeans, African Americans. Next month in Nigeria, 27th, 28th, with the federal government, they're hosting the second Africa Diaspora Summit. And a major thing that's emerging is that the African Americans has got a spending capacity of $1.2 trillion. Yeah. In fact, some of their leaders were saying, you Kenyans, why are you just haggling about Kenya shillings? Talk of trillions of dollars. So, and they have told us we want to see some of this money come to Africa through Kenya, through Konza City. But that may be a story for another day.
Lots of stories to tell. Thank you very much, Dr. Shem Ochuodho. It's been great speaking to you on The Living Legends.
My great pleasure.
It's been an extreme pleasure hosting Dr. Shem Ochuodho on The Living Legends. We can confidently call him the father of the internet in Kenya for being responsible for the internet test run in the country. He has consulted for the governments of Rwanda and South Sudan. Currently leads the Kenyan Diaspora Alliance and has been Rangwe MP. Thank you, Dr. Shem Ochuodho, for being our guest today. I am Fayyaz Qureshi. Thank you for watching.